Good evening and welcome to this town hall meeting. My name is Matthew Bertarami. I'm the board representative. I am the Lake and Dam chairman. Tonight we have John Tucci from Lake Savers, who's going to show what we've done over the past year, actually 2 years, how the lake has been improving and what our plans are for the future. If you have any questions, we ask that you wait till the end. And then there's a microphone up here. Come up to the microphone. You can ask questions to either John or myself. And we'll do our best to give you good answers. Okay, so without further ado, John.
Great. I think I can go without microphone. I'm pretty good at that. It's great. It actually is great to be here this year. It's nice to be able to leave my bulletproof vest at home, and feels real good for that. Just as a reminder, our mission at Lake Savers is to make lakes and reservoirs healthier using natural, sustainable technologies that work. And we worked really hard this year to try and fulfill this mission for Lake Heritage, and I'd like to acknowledge and thank our team, my team, that did a lot of the work down here. Fred Lishman and Corey Thorpe. Anybody millennials don't know how to work hard, haven't met these two guys. So I'm really grateful to have them be carrying the load down here and help us work together to fulfill this mission. And what it's all about is our belief is when you give a lake what it needs to be healthy, the problems that drive us nuts as lake homeowners start to naturally disappear. And the challenge for this lake is, how quickly could we make that happen? And so I thought a lot about how to tell the story tonight, and I think simple is best. So I think the best way to talk about what's going on is to talk about where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. So our agenda will focus on taking us back a little bit so we reorient ourselves to what is the challenge that we're all facing with Lake Heritage. And this is probably an important slide and framework to keep in mind as stakeholders in Lake Heritage. This is called the Lake Trophic Index, and it's a scale that is used by professional limnologists to gauge the overall health of a lake from pristine, which is what is called algotrophic, to pretty healthy, productive with a good fishery, but still not a lot of weeds and algae, to experiencing some problems, to we're in a heap of trouble. And according to a certified lake professional in the state of Pennsylvania, this guy, Lake Heritage on the Trophic Index in 2015, I think this report was done, was at 68 to 71. And you can see the scale that they typically use stops at 65. So this was and still remains a difficult lake improvement and lake maintenance challenge, and that's important to keep in mind. So so a little bit more about that. What does that really mean in terms that we understand as lake homeowners? Well, a hyper-eutrophic lake like this one was out of oxygen below 10 feet. So basically you had a dead zone in the lake below 10 feet prior to aeration. Total phosphorus, which is the key nutrient that feeds that nasty algae that none of us like and can make us sick, is 5 to 15 times target for a healthy lake ecosystem. And it bounces up and down during the season, but on average, it's 5 to 15 times target. The sediment at the bottom of the lake, at least in the center of the lake, not on the edges, you've got nice, clean, hard bottom edges, which is really, in many areas, which is really good for a lot of the lake, but the sediment, where it's not that nice, clean, hard bottom, averaged 70% organic, meaning it was 70% compost, muck, goop, stuff that can feed weeds and algae, and if you put it on your tomatoes, it almost is too fertile and would burn your tomatoes because there's so much nutrient in it. The main inlet total phosphorus levels are 15 to 25 times target for a healthy lake. So every time it rains, not all through the season, but particularly in the spring, that water coming in is 15 to 20 times higher than what you'd want to come into a healthy lake. And we all knew that the result of this was the algae blooms and the E. coli bacteria that really is not stuff you want in the lake. So in 2015, we implemented our program, the Lake Savers Natural Program, whole lake aeration. We filtered a couple of the worst inlets. We used conventional biological treatment. We put some powders and potions into the lake in 2016. And we even tried some new innovations around chemistry. We tried to use some fairly inexpensive materials that were supposed to lock up phosphorus when we put it in the water and keep it away from the blue-green algae. And the result was what I like to call the big fail in 2016. The big fail. We never obviously want to see this again. And we did put a lot of effort, and we're very grateful to the community for coming to this meeting last year with very valid, very important concerns, but giving us a shot to hit it again in 2017. So our commitment, I believe this is a direct quote from that meeting last September, is we will do whatever it takes to prevent this from happening in 2017. And so over the winter, working with Matt and his team and the board, we developed what we call the 2017 DEFCON plan for this lake. And it consisted of 3 specific treatment pathways. DEFCON 1 was what we call a new approach to biological treatment. From our perspective, it's the best. It would be the best alternative because it's the most healthy for the lake, and for you, it's also the cheapest. Okay, so that's 2 good things in its favor. But we had no idea if it would work. So then we developed DEFCON 2, which, and we'll share these slides so you can read this detail if you want. DEFCON 2 was the use of a peroxide-based preventative treatment that is not as beneficial to the lake as biology, but less harmful to the lake than copper sulfate. And DEFCON 3 was copper sulfate. And you can see, another thing you don't really like, you probably really don't like about these two, DEFCON 2 and 3, is the price tag is significantly higher if we had to go that route than pure biological treatment. So that was the game plan. Research and developed a completely new approach to biological treatment, way beyond these off-the-shelf potions and powders that we had tried the year before. We had it in our back pocket to use this peroxide-based treatment, and then in our other back pocket to call in the cavalry and use copper sulfate-based algaecides to not have a repeat of what we had last year. I think it's important also to recap why we are so hesitant to go back to copper sulfate on this lake. And so this is a research paper, side effects from 58 years of copper sulfate treatment on the Fairmont Lakes in Minnesota, several lakes in the developed part of Minnesota. And again, you can read this in more detail later, but basically accelerated, as a result of copper sulfate, you can expect accelerated phosphorus recycling from the lake bed and recovery of the algal population within 7 to 21 days. So you kill it, the phosphorus comes back up off the bottom, and it grows right again. Long-term effects of copper sulfate include copper accumulation in the sediments. Copper is toxic in that form to most life forms in the lake, so that's not a terribly desirable thing. Tolerance adjustments of certain species of algae to copper sulfate dosages. That means that the worst kind of algae, the blue-green algae, develop resistance over time. So, and on and on. The bottom line is copper sulfate is bad for people, it's bad for fish, it's toxic in the lake bed, and it's only good for blue-green algae in the long run. So it is a DEFCON 3. It's only if we have to, is the way we look at it, and we prefer never. A little bit more about the downsides of copper sulfate. When you kill algae with it, it tends to release more of the toxic compounds into the water column, the cyanotoxins. And so even though you may not have as green a water, you can often have a lot more toxic compounds in it that you really don't want to be swimming in. So that's why we're so adamant about trying something different. So that kind of takes us to the present. What we actually did this year was biological treatment with very minimal use of peroxide product early in the season. So we really were able to stay at DEFCON 1 and barely dip into DEFCON 2. No copper sulfate used at all. So any rumors around the lake that, oh, they must have hit it with copper sulfate, not true. What we actually did, though, is the lake, if we all remember, the lake was blooming very early this year. It started turning green in April. And by May 1st, it was bad. And we started treating the last week of April, and we were just getting started with this biological treatment, figuring out how to do it efficiently. We put a treatment in. We thought we saw some minor results. We came back, hit it again within a week. Thought we saw a little bit more results, but by May 10th or so, the lake didn't look a whole lot better. And I remember talking to Matt, and Matt said, it doesn't look like it's working. I think we need to go to copper sulfate. And so we scheduled the copper sulfate, the other treatment company, that would come in with copper sulfate for the Thursday before Memorial Day. And I said to Matt, if you guys will let us do it, we'd like to hit the lake at least 2 more times before Memorial Day to see if we could knock this thing out. And so we did that, and the Monday before Memorial Day weekend, or maybe Tuesday, we were able to call the other company and say, you don't need to come out this Thursday. We also added 3 additional diffusers to the deep end of the lake. We'll talk about some interesting results as a result of that. The cove clean out by this community, the effort that was put in by your team was absolutely, I think, a huge help to the lake. Getting all of that junk out of as many coves as you could get to, and I know that they're planning on continuing that this year. Absolutely fantastic strategy to help keep this lake clean. The reinstallation and improvement of the inlet barriers, combined effort by our guys and by the maintenance crew that you have. We worked together. They got blown out in the spring with some heavy rain. We had to come back, get them back in place, figure out how to reinforce them. So that was a great team effort. And then the installation of the plants, the hyacinth plants, the floating islands, and the one, at least one cove where you sectioned off the whole cove and had all those plants growing, was a really great experiment. One of the findings that many of the folks that have studied this lake, I think including the group from the university this year, was that you don't have enough plants taking up nutrients in this lake, so the only thing left to use it is algae. So by putting those hyacinths in, it was really a fast way to get more vegetation into the lake. It doesn't bother boating, it doesn't hurt anybody, helps clean the water, and then the best thing about it is that they then made the effort to pull all of those plants out of the lake so that all of the phosphorus and all the nitrogen that they used up out of the lake this year is now going to get dumped somewhere else. So you've actually removed some nutrient from the lake. So great team effort, and you know, fortunately, we only had to go pretty much to DEFCON 1. And for us, the real game changer was this Blo-Blast treatment. So where we failed last year with the chemistry approach, we tried to be innovative with chemistry to fix the lake, we kind of had a realization over the winter that we've got a biological problem. There are trillions upon trillions upon trillions of blue-green algae cells that want to grow in this lake. The only way we can logically fight that is to find some other biological organism that can take them on one-on-one. And it turns out the only way to do that cost effectively is not to dump a bunch of potions and powders in the lake, but to actually get into the brewing business. So instead of being a microbrew for beer, we're a microbrewery this year for beneficial bacteria. Very microscopic. Some of these organisms you can only see with an electron microscope, but in each one of our tanks there are trillions upon trillions of these beneficial organisms that we wake up in these tanks and then get into the lake as quickly as we can and as high volume as we can. They're all natural, beneficial bacteria strains. They're very common soil and water organisms, so there's nothing weird in them that you don't see out in the environment. We're just concentrating them. They're native to North America, and they're certified organic and non-GMO. So this is not, you know, science fiction creating new bugs that are going to now turn and attack us. This is pretty safe, pretty proven technology that is used in agriculture, used in wastewater. We have just amped it up to a new level, and in fact, I calculated it all out. We did 10 treatments of the lake between 4/26 and this week, and put a total of 200,000 gallons of activated product in this lake in order to try to combat this. And you spend a lot of money for that. You know, I'm not going to go deep into budgets. You can talk to your board. But what I will say is I did the calculation. You pay about 17 cents a gallon for that product. And if you can find a cheaper way to do what we did this year with this product, let me know, because I'll start doing that. And I think most of you might have seen, that's a 250-gallon tank that we have on the boat. We had another one on a truck that we were able to get into the coves. So you can do the math, divide 200,000 by 250. That's how many trips we made to try and get this product where it needed to be in the lake during the course of the summer. This was the coolest thing on the float. You know, I love the little ones; those were great. But this is really innovative. You basically took a dead-end cove, your team, put a simple, inexpensive boom in, and how many plants did you start in this when you first started it, Matt?
20.
20 turned into this. Water hyacinth that grows great. And, you know, and now all of that's been harvested. 99.9% of that's been harvested out and is taking that nutrient right out of the lake. So really great, you know, these technologies are not easy. It's not easy fixing a lake that's in this condition and doing it naturally. But, you know, together with the innovation you guys are doing, because I will tell you, this is a fact. You can measure the square footage of that. There is several companies that sell floating treatment wetlands or floating islands that you can plant with plants. Planted and installed, those are $80 to $100 a square foot. So if you want to do the math, you measure this by this. And you could do the math of how much that area is. That one area with one of these manufactured floating islands probably would have cost you $100,000. That's a guess, but that's the, you know, you can do the math at $80 to $100.
Under 200.
What's that?
The cost is under $200.
Under $200.
Do all of them.
To do all of them. So that's innovation right there. That's what it takes to, it kind of takes a village or takes a community. That's what it takes to turn a lake like this around, is that kind of thinking and innovation. So now it's time to talk about results. I think we can all agree that 2017 was an improvement, but what does the data say? We've got a lot of it. So we're going to cover what the data says about algae, about water chemistry, and about sediment chemistry. For those of you that are not into data and would rather surf on Facebook or whatever for the next few minutes, I can sum it up in two simple graphics. 2016, that's what the data said. 2017, that's what the data said. So, well, let's dig into the real differences. This is a picture of what we call an algae community assessment. The green color is blue-green algae. It's the algae you don't want in your lake in any quantity. It's natural to have 1 to 10% of the total population be blue-green algae even in a healthy lake. But you can see, oh great, in the spring we were all happy. We had good water clarity, no blue-green algae. We thought, the aeration is going to work great. But pretty soon it got warm and a lot of other things happened. And blue-green algae was over 95% of the total population of the algae in the water in this lake through virtually all of 2016. Then we get into 2017 right here, and you can see it's starting to bloom. As early as March and April, it's starting to get bad, 25–30%. And this is right around the time we started our Blo-Blast treatment. We were a little late. I mean, it caught us by surprise that it bloomed that early. So we were, I guess, just in time. And you can see we treated probably 3 times between here and here. And you can see how within a couple weeks after that, it really started to flip. And now we were in through the summer where we really had very little blue-green algae in June and July. Started to creep up a little bit toward the end of August and the end of September. But there's a second part. Well, first the takeaway from this. Bad algae dominated in 16. Good algae, for the most part, dominated in 17 once the Blo-Blast treatment took hold. And then this is specifically the blue-green algae pattern of growth through 16 and 17. So I've isolated blue-green algae. 95+% through all of the summer of 16. It naturally dies off in the winter. Started climbing up again early in 17. We hit it with a Blo-Blast. It took about a month for that to kick in, and then we dropped it right off the table until it creeped up just a little bit in the end of 17. Well, we were kind of backing off the treatment also to kind of save a little bit of budget as well. So the takeaway here is blue-green algae was reduced to virtually 0 risk or concern Memorial Day through Labor Day. However, we did learn that, because we've had some fall issues, we did learn that as it creeps back up again, up past 10%, we really need to be vigilant, because that's when we were starting to see some collection in the coves again this fall. Now, another piece of good news related to that is a measure of not just percent, but the total algal cells in a sample that we take. It's cells per milliliter on a slide, and you can see when the lake blooms like crazy with blue-green algae, you've got 600+, 500+, 400+ cells per milliliter. Cells per milliliter. A milliliter is a very small amount of water. But you can see as we got into 17 and the Blo-Blast kicked in, we maintained significantly lower cell counts of all types of algae in the water for all of 17. So even though we had some creeping of the blue-green algae in some of these, it's still on a pure number of cells in the lake basis was way less than anything we experienced in 2016. And again, that's where we kind of started the Blo-Blast. The lake was much cleaner in terms of total amount of algae in the water column in 17. You know, the cell counts in 17 reflect a pretty healthy, balanced level of growth in the lake. Now, I'd love to keep, next year, I'd like to have them all be under 100 or you know, under 60 even. That would be even better. But big improvement, almost a tenfold improvement on some of these versus 2016. The microcystin testing, this is not testing that we do, this is testing the other company does. This is the stuff that can make you sick in the lake if the blue-green gets bad enough. So in 2016, the target in Ohio, you know, the target of warning, and really you got to take notice because Pennsylvania doesn't have one, and neither does Michigan, but Ohio does, is 20 micrograms per liter. So you can see we were okay in the center of the lake for part of the summer, but way over in the nearshore areas where it was really green and nasty. And then later in the year, it got incredibly bad. I mean, this is nightmare scenario here. Center of the lake, over 25, and then nearshore, this was over 6,000. That's bad. That's epic fail 2016. That's what that is. 2017, there were 2 testing dates. There were 2 tests conducted. I think a third. We're waiting for the results. Look at the difference. And what does that really mean? Well, the takeaway here is levels were lower than what is allowable for drinking water, for adults and school-age children in 2017. So this is virtually zero. In some cities that get their water from reservoirs instead of wells, they're sending water with more microcystin in out to your taps. So that's big improvement. That's significant. So while we still dealt with some scummy stuff here and there in some places, it was a sea change in terms of the risk to dogs and kids and us using the water. And we were looking to improve on this and on the aesthetics even more next year. So now into sediment chemistry. We track the water clarity using this tried and true Secchi disc measurement. You know, we all got cocky and fooled in June 1 of 2016, we had 10 feet of clarity. And we thought, oh, it must be the aeration. Oh, it must have been the winter bacteria we put in. And then the lake taught us a lesson. As we know, both with algae and water clarity, what we think actually happened is we had a good snowmelt year and the lake filled up with good clean water from snowmelt in 2016, but the nutrients were high, and as soon as it got warm enough, the blue-green algae took off, and we were done. In 2017, the water coming into the lake wasn't really great. We didn't have a lot of snow, and the early water was a lot of runoff from the barren farm fields. With the spring rains, I think they brought in a lot of nutrient, and so the algae actually started to take off earlier. But we got on top of it, and while we didn't have what I would call great water clarity, it did start to improve significantly as we got into the fall. And the takeaway here is there was a lot less bad stuff in the water that could affect water clarity, but there was still a lot of stuff in the water. So it wasn't going to hurt you. It wasn't real icky. It didn't make you feel real slimy. but because there's still so much nutrient in the lake, something is going to grow there. At least this year we had stuff growing in the water that was healthier for us and healthier for the lake. But our goal is to bring the nutrient levels down enough in future years to keep the lake above what I consider kind of a minimum clarity target of 5 feet. I'd really like to see 6+ feet of clarity. That would be like a really neat goal to get to on this lake as quickly as we can. Total phosphorus. Big changes. I mean, you can see, I don't know what, here's what I can say about this. I think we have to take some credit for this trend here. The levels were so high prior to this year and so bouncy that this seems to be an unusual pattern. We obviously had a spike here in August, probably related to some heavy rains. We want to track this over probably another couple of years and see if we can continue this kind of overall downward trend and eliminate these real big spikes. So we think this is going in the right direction, but it's a little too early to tell for sure. This is when we started the Blo-Blast treatment. It's improving, we think, but this is still the major issue that needs to be addressed moving forward. You can see this is the target for a healthy lake. And we kind of got close. And one data point, July 3rd, don't know why really. And then we bounced back up and we're still pretty far away. This is too big of a delta on average from what's healthy for a lake for total phosphorus, and we need to close that gap. This is what's called soluble reactive phosphorus. That's the phosphorus that the algae can use right away to fuel its growth. A little better story here in terms of the prior pattern of some really huge spikes and some really incredibly high levels. This is really, you can have wastewater lagoons that have this amount or even a little less orthophosphate in it than what these levels up here are. And we think that's a function of when the blue-green algae blooms and busts, as those cells die, they release a ton of phosphorus into the water, and then that fuels the next bloom, and then it kind of comes down a little bit, and then a lot of it dies, and it fuels the next bloom. And what we think is that by, again, working the Blo-Blast treatment, we think that this pattern is significant in that we're starting to see a much more much less volatile bouncing of the orthophosphate, and we're seeing a pretty strong trend line over time of getting it closer to this ideal level of this is 10 parts per billion, and we hit around here, we hit levels just over 30 parts per billion. So you can see the difference. This is 30 parts per billion. This is 160 parts per billion. Big difference. Actually, it might be more than that. This might be 1,600 parts per billion. So we think this is the key to why we had such a great result for most of 2017 is that we got very consistent reduction in this bioavailable or soluble reactive phosphorus. And we want to push this even harder next year. We think the way to do that is to start treating the lake earlier so that we can avoid this kind of spiking in the early spring when the lake wants to start to get into that bloom cycle. So here's dissolved oxygen. You can see in 2016, the aeration system was not able to keep dissolved oxygen above the target of 2 milligrams per liter in the 40-foot depth of the lake. This was still a pretty big improvement in dissolved oxygen over prior years with no aeration system, but this was identified as a problem, something that we needed to fix. You can see in 2017, we had just one point where we were getting close to the lower limit but recovered fairly quickly and stayed pretty consistently above the lower limit for the whole season. And we'll have numbers from today too, but as the water gets colder, this will most definitely go up in the last measurement of the season. The takeaway, dissolved oxygen is much better in 17. The additional diffusers were key, but we think that the reduction in blue-green algae was even more important, and we'll talk about why on the next slide. So this is the temperature of the water at the surface, which is blue, the middle of the water column, which is 20 feet down in the 40-foot zone, and 40 feet down at the bottom in the deep part of the lake. And what this tells us, what our aeration system is supposed to do is mix the lake well enough and rapidly enough that it pretty much equalizes temperature top to bottom, even in the 40-foot depth. And you can see in 2016, until we hit the fall when the water gets colder and, actually, it wasn't even that. We added the diffusers. We added the new diffusers. We had a pretty big delta in 2016 in temperature from top to bottom. No offense to any engineers in the room, but you got to realize that this system was engineered by a professional engineer doing all the calculations that engineers do and to size these systems. And actually, they sized the system originally for 18 diffusers. I'm a pretty conservative guy. I won't tell you what they called me in high school. Can't tell you that. But I'm a pretty safe guy. I'm a pretty conservative guy. So I took that 18 diffuser design and we upped it to 23 when we implemented the system. So that's probably a 25% safety rate relative to the engineered design by the professional engineer. And we still have this delta. So it tells me that real-world conditions are a little different than what the desk jockeys see when they do these calculations. So fortunately, we had sized the system so that it could be expandable again. And we added the 3 diffusers in the very deep part of the lake, upping up to 27. And look at the difference through the summer. Very small delta in temperature all through this whole year as a result of the addition of those diffusers. So what that says is that the system is doing a much better job of circulating the water fast enough to pull oxygenated water down to the bottom and keep that moving continuously. If you then start to run out of oxygen at the bottom, despite that, doesn't necessarily mean your aeration system is bad. It's doing the job it's supposed to do. It's just that you have so much demand at the bottom of the lake that it's using up the oxygen faster than we can get it down there. And even adding a couple of diffusers more may not even help that situation because at a given temperature, when the water gets warmer in the summer, the water holds less oxygen, so even if we mixed it faster, we probably wouldn't change that DO characteristic very much with additional diffusers now that we've got it dialed in here. So our answer is that with the addition of these 3 diffusers, the system is pretty well optimized. Further improvements in DO will come from reducing the amount of biology in the lake. And the only way to do that is to reduce the nutrients. So that's kind of pulling our story together about where we're going to start to go. One more slide that's important is the sediment chemistry, the muck on the bottom. We take 6 measurements up through the spine of the lake where the depth and the amount of the muck is the deepest and it's the most mucky. From the dam all the way up to within 100, 200 feet of the viaduct there, of the bridge. And before we started in 2015, the average organic content of that muck across those samples was 70% compost and 30% mineral. sand or silt, crushed rock. While we failed on a lot of things in 2016, one of the things we didn't fail at was starting to reduce that muck on the bottom. And so you can see we had some dramatic improvements in reducing the amount of compost in the bottom in 2016. We kind of spiked up a little bit here, probably from inputs of new stuff with the spring runoff season off the farm fields. Kind of got it back under control. The key point here is the healthiest lakes in the world. I'm talking, lakes that you can see 50 feet down in. Their level of organic in the sediment is 10% or less. And we're hovering just around 20% on average now as a result of aeration. Now, it's because of where your muck is, it's very difficult to measure the thickness change over time, but we can correlate this with a lot of other lakes that we work on where we have done actual depth measurements of the sediment. And our conservative estimate is that you've taken at least a foot of muck out of the 75-acre zone of the lake that's very mucky in the center of the lake, which equates to 75 acre-feet of muck, which equates to about 120 cubic yards of muck, which if you had to dredge that out, it would have cost you more than $2 million to do that. So the aeration system, by the chemistry, this is still an estimate, so, don't take this one to the bank. But we know as a result of this change, if we started out with a pile of muck on the bottom that was 70% organic on average, and we've got it down to 20%, the only way that happens is that we've reduced that organic layer, and we're getting more and more concentration of sand and silt in the bottom.
Bubbling?
It is they call it biological dredging. So by getting oxygen to that compost pile, it's like a compost pile in your backyard. You start out with a huge pile of leaves, and if you aerate it and turn it a few times once a week, the bacteria and the little critters that can eat those leaves, same thing, that's the same stuff that's on the bottom of the lake. And the bacteria that we're putting in at the surface, some of it works in the water column, some of it goes down to the bottom and eats the compost at the bottom of the lake. But it needs oxygen to do that, so that's where the aeration and the bugs work together. So, you can get back off of Facebook and, see the conclusions. Fighting with biology works. I don't think there's any doubt. I mean, Mother Nature can throw us curveballs. She threw us one this fall when which required us to come in and treat again because we didn't want to end the season on a down note and have the lake, go to sleep with a big blue-green algae bloom on it. So we whacked it again this week. But the data is pretty incontrovertible that this Blo-Blast technology worked to break the cycle of blue-green algae for this year. The cove cleanup strategy is high payoff and should be continued. The floating islands, great innovation, should be expanded and continued. And then the observations indicate that the inlet filtration work that we've done are reducing the amount of sediment and nutrient reaching the lake. Matt had an observation that when they put the floating islands in behind our barriers in Plum Run, the bottom was pretty firm and you could walk out there and put them in. And when they went to take them out, they were pretty deep in really soft, goopy stuff. So it's kind of hard to measure by the numbers how well they're doing, but they're clearly doing something. And we think that as budget allows, we need to continue. And I think the committee has already continued to do some additional filtration work upstream from the lake. And that is a key strategy to continue as well. So, and the future is very short, so don't worry. The future is very short. So where to from here? You may be thinking, and I'm kind of thinking because, our guys are busy up in our other part of Pennsylvania for a lot of the summer, so I got the short straw, and A lot of that 200,000 gallons of product was put into the lake by yours truly this summer. So you're probably thinking 2017 was great, but how do we get off of this expensive train? You know, we don't want to be putting 200,000 gallons of biology into the lake every year for the rest of our lives. I certainly don't, and I know you probably don't want to pay for it. I don't think it's going to be easy, but this is our project over the winter. The key point here, the next frontier, is phosphorus. We got to keep driving phosphorus down in this lake any way, shape, or form. Rapid and significant reductions in water column phosphorus is pretty much the only way we're going to really break the cycle and get to the point where we don't have to put hundreds of thousands of gallons of biology into the lake to repeat this result next year. You're doing some things already, inlet filtration. The floating islands are helping. The second part is, no matter what, though, I still think, given the characteristics of this lake and its watershed, you're probably always going to need some amount. You're probably always going to need aeration to keep this lake healthy. But if we can do these two things, I think we can get a much healthier lake and do it at a lower cost over time. One of the things we're doing is this is a PhD from the University of Minnesota. This is his PhD student. This was a picture on their visit to my lake in Michigan. We are partnering with the Abbas Research Lab, who has developed a phosphorus sponge technology that we think has a lot of promise of enabling us to literally go, it's a sponge, literally go to the lake and deploy this material into the lake and pull out enough phosphorus quickly enough to get an accelerated reduction in phosphorus. And we have been selected, we haven't inked the agreement totally, but we believe that we will be selected to commercialize this technology for lakes. And if there's one thing that I know about the lake market is, if this technology is greater than sliced bread but no one can afford it, who cares? So my role in commercialization will be to make sure that what they're telling me about the potential economics of this technology doesn't get messed up by somebody who thinks that lake homeowners have unlimited pockets to dip into to pay for this kind of thing. So that's where we're trying to go. In the meantime, we need to keep pushing on the inlet filtration and the floating islands to help move that phosphorus curve down for the lake and get us off the kind of the very aggressive biology treatment. So that's the long story. It wasn't a short story. That's the long story. So I'm happy to entertain any questions.